Commissioners for Tuesday, May 15th, 2018, back to order. And we are on item 12, Public Works. And the first item is item A, order 1805-1506 in the matter of adopting the Lane County Road and Bridge Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 2018-19 through 2022-23. And we've got Dan and David and Monica, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'll note that this is also a public hearing today for the 5-year CIP, and that has been advertised in the paper, and we'll be getting on with the public hearing in a minute. I just explain the process a little bit. Staff will give a summary of the proposed CIP, then I'll open the public hearing and request anyone that wants to speak on the CIP to speak. And we'll just take you in the order you're signed up, and then we'll close the public hearing after we've gone through everyone that wants to speak, and then we'll move on to board deliberations from there. So I'll let staff start off with their presentation. So Dan.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Very excited to be here today to present our CIP, our Capital Improvement Plan. This is a big update. It's nothing like what we've seen in the last couple of years. In the last couple of years, we've only been able to have a handful of preservation overlay projects. And I don't want to steal Monica's thunder here, but big number of improvements and number of projects and the amount of money we're able to put towards these projects, thanks largely in part to the House Bill 2017 that passed the legislature last year. So very exciting time. Monica and Dave here have done a terrific job putting this together, and Peggy Kepler, our county engineer who couldn't be here today. But we've done a big lift, not only in inserting the number of projects into this that came out of our transportation system plan. Very excited to be able to finally chip away at some projects that have been listed there for many years. But it's also a big lift in the document itself. We've reorganized it. Monica's added terrific graphics to make it more user-friendly for readers. And with that, I'll just pass it to Monica, and you can talk about all the terrific work you've done there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to have Dave start and introduce the program.
Good afternoon, Chair Bozovich and Commissioners. Just to echo a little bit of what Dan said, I'm really pleased to be here today speaking to you on this CIP. I remember coming here 2 years ago, and it was a much different story. So very pleased, and also I want to extend a thank you for your leadership at this local level, but also influence at the state level to get additional funding. So thank you. So here's a quick outline of what we'll be talking about today in this presentation. So first, I'll mention just on one slide, provide some background. What is the purpose of the CIP? I know for you all, you are aware of that, but for anybody in the public watching this, I think that's a good reminder for us to revisit. Also, I'll talk about the CIP process, how we update it every 2 years, and the timeline, and how we got to this point today. And then Monica will speak about the CIP, the overview, getting into the funding specifics and the projects, and then we'll talk about next steps and, of course, open it up for the public hearing and ask for your deliberation and action. So a little bit on the CIP purpose. Again, it's a 5-year program of projects, and we update it every 2 years, and some agencies, you'll see do it every year, but in recent times we've done this every 2 years, and it allows us time to really help and work with you and the citizens on prioritizing these projects for a 5-year period. And then every 2 years, we're able to revisit those priorities and see if that's something that's still in line with the county's efforts. And again, there's a 2-year emphasis because it is updated every 2 years. So when you look through the projects, the first 2 years are the ones that we'll be implementing before it's updated again in the next round. The CIP, it informs the road fund component of the overall budget so that it's consistent with the board's policy direction and Lane County's priorities. So if you think back to our transportation system plan that was updated last year and adopted by you, there's goals and policies in there. So we try to line those up with that. Also in the Transportation Safety Action Plan, the TSAP, there are numerous safety projects that are consistent with those action items as well. And then lastly, we believe the CIP represents the historic emphasis on maintenance and preservation of our transportation system. And then the third bullet there talks about that the CIP is really serves as our work program for the Engineering and Construction Services Division. It outlines projects for which projects will apply for grant funding for local match, things like that. Also for design and engineering, and finally into construction. This next slide looks at the overall timeline and the process that we've been through today. So again, it was 2 years ago when you adopted the last CIP. So we started by looking at that document, and we looked at which projects were in there. And as a reminder, there were just five projects in that CIP, and you've probably seen from reading this that there's 43 in this CIP. So that's what that extra funding helps with, big difference. And so we looked at that as a starting point. Then we prepared a draft project list. We pulled, again, projects from the TSP, so the Transportation System Plan, and then looked at the road maintenance, pavement condition index for those things and other priorities. And then we went to the Transportation Advisory Committee, the TRAC. We went to them twice in this process. The first time was to get them the opportunity to take a first look at our project tables. And then the second time was for an actual public hearing where we advertised and solicited public input. Then finally, we received their recommendation, which was put in your packet, and that's what's before you today. And lastly, we'll be asking for your adoption through this last process. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Monica.
Thank you. I'd like to step back a moment and reflect on the previous CIP updates. Most recently, they described declining revenues due to diminishing secure rural schools funding and a limited road fund, yet we had about 1,500 road miles to maintain and 415 bridges, and that remains the same. So at 43 projects, we're looking at a 38 project increase as compared to that last CIP. Dave mentioned we had about 5. We're also looking at an estimated $65 million funding package, a portion of which, and is the majority, come from external funding. And we have allocated approximately $26 million from the road fund. That's an increase of about $42 million as compared to the last CIP, which had about $23 million for the full package, and then $15 million from the road fund. Certain external funding sources I'd like to highlight include Federal Lands Access Program funds, not exactly a grant program, but come from other sources with our federal partners, congestion mitigation and air quality grants, and the statewide transportation improvement program. And as Dan mentioned, a large part of this will come from House Bill 2017. It's projected over 10 years. We will receive $80 million. And wanted to point out too, though the overall amount from the road fund is higher in this CIP as compared to the last, we have, again, the $26 million as compared to 15. The proportional cost to the Lane County Road Fund in this CIP is less. So it's just showing that diverse set of different funding sources we're looking at this time. And wanted to provide on this slide a visual depiction of that funding trend for the CIP. We see this time we have the $26 million, and it shows that while we've nearly doubled the capacity from the road fund, we're still well below the levels of service we were once able to provide with this funding. In the 2004 to 2008 set of years, you see that peak level that's significantly dropped, and this shows the road fund specifically. You wanted to point out what's coming out from county-specific resources. The next few slides, I'll further describe the full program and each category, refocusing back on that $65 million package. On page 16 of the document and tables 5 through 13 further detail, and wanted to reiterate this is an estimated $65 million. And as part of this work program, the CIP will be constantly reviewed. It's a continuous process of coordination amongst our work groups to reconcile the actual funding we will receive with what has been estimated. So we're going to be looking at this as projects change in scope if needed, and we'll respond to that funding, any notifications we receive. And so looking back at the categories, we do want to uphold the maintenance and preservation priority. We have a lot of deferred maintenance to catch up on, so that's why we're seeing a large amount addressing those concerns to take care of those existing assets that we have. And this amount alone in this category is equivalent to that full amount in the previous CIP package, again, for some perspective. We do think this is an opportunity to reintroduce some of the other categories we have previously been unable to address, and a large portion of this, because of HB 2017, will allow us to earmark a lot of that for territorial highway. That's why there's such a large amount dedicated to that category. And the right-of-way category allocates the least amount of funding to address the staff time involved in acquiring right-of-ways. So it's just showing a different type of work and money dedicated toward not the construction materials, but still accounting for that as part of our work involved in getting a project from conception to completion. And looking at the general construction and the bridges and structures categories, we have similar funding amounts. Safety has less, but wanted to point out here that it doesn't mean we are focusing less on safety. A lot of the projects, if not all of them, have a safety element as part of the project, but safety in itself in this category might represent a more specific localized project that does not have other elements. I'll further describe that in explaining the categories on the next slides. And wanted to explain, I don't know if we touched on that in the purpose, we get the CIP projects from a variety of sources. We look at our pavement condition index, pavement management program software for paving specific projects. We refer to the TSP, the TSAP as well. So we have a lot of guidance and documents informing our decisions on what to recommend to the board. In pointing out the TSP and the TSAP specifically, 11 of the 43 projects come from the TSP, and 15 directly implement principles of the TSAP. So it's an opportunity to demonstrate some consistency on those previously stated priorities. And I wanted to briefly describe each category. So pavement preservation and road rehabilitation, this is going to be the emphasis in those first 2 years, just to address that deferred maintenance. We have some occurring in the Springfield area, Eugene area, as well as the rural areas. I think Lorraine Highway is one example of something outside of the urban area. Our roads and bridges category, the bridges and structures category, we have a variety of projects that relate to preservation, such as the Dorena Covered Bridge, but also elements that reflect the findings from our ODOT bridge report, which relate to the emergency lifeline routes identified as critical pathways. So just a broad set of projects in that category. Right-of-way, as I mentioned, is just associated with the acquisition phase of a larger project. So Territorial Highway, for example, might have that, as well as the Yolanda project in Springfield with some safety improvements and sidewalk and bike lane. The general construction category, that is going to involve major construction, oftentimes addressing capacity enhancements, so a bigger structural change in a roadway. We're not going to be adding new roads. This package shows how we're going to address safety on a larger scale with these projects. You'll also have another opportunity to review these general construction projects. These are brought to the Transportation Advisory Committee and public for design input. And ultimately, the board will have an opportunity to weigh in and choose to move forward with certain design options. Safety, as I mentioned, all of the projects really address safety, but certain ones might not have a general construction element or right-of-way. So this might mean rumble strips alone or bike and pedestrian facilities. So Territorial Highway would be an example of a safety element. And getting into that project, we don't have a separate category for Territorial Highway, but wanted to highlight that as a really specific element to track. Just for budgeting purposes, you'll see a separate table. It will allow us to keep track of things as money moves toward the county from ODOT, and also wanted to emphasize just the level of effort this project will take and demonstrate how many categories fall into this segment. We wanted to highlight as well the previous efforts to apply for grant funding, some of which was awarded for design and outreach, and this year we did not receive the Tiger grant, but intend to reapply again under the renamed program, which is now the Builds Transportation Grant. So we're going to try to move forward with that as best as possible. Next slide is just a visual representation of the geographic distribution. This is by district on this slide outlined in blue. The document shows our maintenance zones to help internally track across divisions. Here, just to emphasize, every district has a project, and these yellow and orange rectangles just represent that index. So within each rectangle, there's multiple projects occurring, as you can see in the document. The orange and the yellow don't mean anything. It's just to better show where the distribution lies. And in terms of next steps, after today, depending on the outcome, propose minor updates at this point. We have recently appointed new Transportation Advisory Committee members and would like to acknowledge that in the document, as well as document the board proceedings that may arise from today or future events. So couple edits. And then today we'll be hearing any input with requested revisions, and we'll post the final document to the website. Throughout this process, we've been posting drafts and hearing dates. Plan to distribute to partner agencies as requested. And again, I mentioned you'll see some of the projects, again, if we move forward with general construction. I'll leave this slide as the last slide here, and eventually, after this slide, we'll have an opportunity for that public hearing and would like to hear any questions or comments that we'd welcome from the board. And to reiterate the options, as stated in the agenda memo, we can continue the public hearing if there are a lot of comments received today. If that needed to continue, just depends on who has signed up. If we do not have much comment and we're going to fit within this time frame, two options are to adopt the CIP with no amendments as presented, and then we can adopt it, but account for any revisions the board recommends and make sure that happens and provide another opportunity for review. So I wanted to thank you again just for the ability to say we have a CIP and get to work on this. This has been great for me for a first time on this project. So appreciate it, and thank you again also on your guidance on this specific effort.
So any questions for staff before we go to the public hearing? I just, one clarification I would like to get. In your funding sources, are the current 18 and 19 SRS payments that were included in the omnibus spending bill a part of this CIP?
My understanding, they were not included in that.
There are tables that note where it might occur, but we have a category in Table 13 that shows one-time payments, and that could capture that. Paving and general construction, we have some notes at the bottom of the table. You'll see that provided we get that direction today, we can then allocate that more specifically. But we kind of earmarked it for now. Does that clarify?
So it's not actually, because we got a separate presentation at Budget Committee for the plans to spend that particular funding, and I wanted to make sure that that they weren't crossing over with each other.
I'll have to go back and look. I think it's a mixed answer. And there are some projects that were identified for one-time funding. For example, the stormwater assessment, which we plan to use SRS money for that, but it's separate from this plan. But we have some paving projects that are listed, so I think those are part of the CIP.
Okay, because that's, because there's a sort of, as you know, we're kind of in two different budget processes here. One's the CIP and one's our actual 18-19 fiscal year budget, which includes plans for utilization of those SRS funds that we'll be taking in during that time period. So I want to make sure I have a clear understanding of if we adopt today, does that tie the Budget Committee's hands, separately? So I don't know if that's why I'm kind of looking,
Right.
as I'm getting ready to open the public hearing, I'm kind of looking to see, should this be a continuance till after the Budget Committee makes decisions on the use of the SRS funds, if the SRS funds are included in the CIP?
If I may, my understanding with the CIP is that we always take the CIP to the board first, and it's a list of programs for how to spend the funds, but it's actually the budget then that's adopted afterwards, and that's the final document that directs the spending. So in this case, I don't think it would preclude you from, making a change of some sort in the money during the actual budget process.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate that David's absolutely right, that the CIP is a planning document, and it is funded, and the projects within it are authorized through the budget process. So ultimately, the Budget Committee and the board have the final say over which projects are going to happen through the budget process.
Great.
So they won't be in conflict. If you choose to approve the CIP today and make changes to the budget is the guiding document.
And this is a 5-year plan that we will revisit.
Correct,
every
in 2 years.
So,
Great, okay, just want to make sure that was clear before we go to the public hearing. So if there are any other questions before the public hearing? Then I will open the public hearing. And do we have anyone signed up for the public hearing? Is there anyone in the audience or present that would like to address the board concerning the 5-year road CIP? Seeing none, then I will close the public hearing and move on to further board questions and deliberations. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just absolutely agree. It's kind of nice to be talking about a CIP, a real one. Yeah. The others weren't quite so real. So it takes me back when I was mayor of the other city and across the freeway and used to listened to Lane County's CIP when they had secure rural schools money coming in. It was so significant back in those days. And so this is really exciting. One of the things, and I'm glad you mentioned road miles and bridges, because I think it gets lost sometimes that Lane County is second in the state of Oregon out of any county with the most road miles. Only Malheur County has more, but we have more county-owned bridges than any county in the state, which is really significant because we're responsible for those. And so when I see a CIP and we're looking at how do we maintain our roads and our bridges, it's very significant. I appreciate that very much. So I'd like to go back. I'd like to talk a little bit about territorial. And it is my understanding that when you looked at the Tiger grant from past to the Bill grant today, the criteria, I believe, has changed. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're looking at that right now. In fact, Becky is at the office. She's she's going through the comparison of the two. But yeah, it's not gonna. I don't think it's identical.
Yeah, it's my understanding that it's a little bit more flexible than the original Tiger. And what's exciting is they've tripled the amount of money involved here. So I think it was $500 million, and now the total program has $1.5 billion.
That's correct.
And which I think will help as far as applying for that. And I'm glad to hear that staff is looking at reapplying. Because if you weren't, I was going to urge you to please reapply. And especially since the criteria, I think, is changing enough where might make it so it's going to be a project that will be seriously looked at and hopefully be funded. But so I was looking at that piece. The other question I have is not necessarily related to the CIPs, but it is related to what Public Works does. And but I think when you go through all the issues, it could be. So, for instance, we've had some of these bad freezes. We've had branches come down. We've had the road and the roadways. We've had the flooding over on the west side, and then getting close to the mountains, you have issues that come up with roads due to snow and ice. So when we look at the budget that's being prepared and the overall budget coming in to your department, how much money do you have set aside? Are you able to set aside now money for what I would call disaster? And like when it comes to flooding, freezing, that type of thing, are you able to put money aside for that?
We are. We just went through a process to define what level we should set our reserve at, and those fell into three categories. I'm trying to remember those. Catastrophic, there's a revenue stability, and I'm forgetting the third one. But we set levels for each one of those to account for those circumstances. We can't possibly save up enough money for, the big earthquake. But, would assume that we would have enough in our reserves for the catastrophic event to get started on some of our key bridges, for example, and then would work to get federal reimbursement in a large emergency situation. But we do have our reserves set away. We've gone through a process, and the board has adopted that, and that actually allowed us to find that we had some money above that reserve threshold that we'll be able to spend as one-time funds in this upcoming budget year.
Well, I personally like the way you've prioritized, and because this is really our first true CIP we've had in a while. I'm not one who's going to suggest making a tremendous amount of changes. I'm going to really rely on your expertise on this one, because the fact that you're actually able to put something together and present it to the board. So I'm not here to suggest we make a lot of changes. I'm here to really support the work that you've done and the effort you put into it. So to me, this is one where if I were to look at the options, it would be adopted with no amendments. That's just for me personally. And I'm glad Chair Bozovich talked about the Secure Rural Schools money, because I think from that piece, it is appropriate to go through the budget process first, because that is such new money that has come before us. And again, has been treated like as one-time money, because we don't know if that's ever going to come again. I mean, who knows at this point in time? But as far as this is concerned, I just really appreciate the work that you put into this, and to me, it makes a lot of sense, and thank you very much, and glad to see this, so job well done. Thanks.
Any other questions? I'll just say I'm pleased to see a real CIP coming forward. I do remember the days back in the 90s when this county used to supply funds from the road fund to the municipalities in this county to bolster their road fund CIP, because we had such excess funding coming in through the timber harvest and then the timber harvest replacement dollars. But, you know, at that point in the mid-90s, we were still living off of a lot of timber harvest reserves we had built up. In fact, I think there was a little project I did over in Springfield to bring a certain compact disc manufacturer over there that the road fund paid for all the road improvements for International Way and Gateway and a few other places that went around that came out of the county road fund. Was where, and that was specifically sourced to help with economic development. And I'm sure that Sarah wishes we could still do things like that at times over in our economic development department. But just to get back to a level of funding, and particularly I'm pleased to see the pavement preservation projects be the majority of that, because we were behind. As we were trying to tell people a couple of years back when we were looking at doing our own local source of funding through the vehicle registration fee, how dangerously low we were spending on pavement preservation and the long-term cost of that. And fortunately, there wasn't a long enough period that we can't catch up somewhat without having to do major full structure rehabilitation of the roadways. But so I'm kind of pleased when you get a chance to catch up. And thanks, Sid, and everyone that did the heavy lifting on House Bill 2017 to get us that opportunity to catch up. And it's really great to see, you know, some real work being done out there on our roads, and people will notice, I think, and I'm looking forward to that. So if there's no further discussion and we've held the public hearing, I think we are prepared for action. So I will look for a motion. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'd like to move approval of Order 1805-1506 in the matter of adopting the Lane County Road and Bridge Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 2018-19 through 2022-23.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lyken, seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve the 5-year road and bridge CIP. Any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Lyken.
So Monica, being this your first time doing this, we hope that this will constantly be improved over and over again for the years to come. So we'll be working on that anyway. So
I have some ideas in mind already, actually. Thank you.
Started with a high bar.
that's right. That's what I kind of thought. Oh, the bar's here. So, okay, now we know what to strive for. So
Maybe she's like a good luck charm.
I very much so. Yeah.
We're going to need it to get those projects off the ground.
Any other discussion of the motion? No. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks for your support.
Thank you.
That brings us to item B this afternoon of Public Works, which is the second reading and public hearing on ordinance 1356 in the matter of co-adopting amendments to the Coburg Comprehensive Plan, including expanding the urban growth boundary for employment land, repealing ordinance number PA 1315 and adopting savings and severability clauses, file number 509 PA 14-05404. And the applicant was the city of Coburg. And we have Lindsay Eichner here and Lydia Kay from our Land Management Division. And at this point, I will note that we are going to be holding a public hearing, and the decision of the board is subject to establishing findings of fact showing compliance with the applicable comp plan policies and lane code criteria cited in the staff report. Evidence and testimony must be directed towards the approval criteria. Testimony not directed toward the approval criteria may not be relevant to this land use proceeding. Individuals wishing to address the board must first be recognized by the chair, state their full name and residence address, and please use the sign-up sheet if you're wishing to address the board. And any disruptive conduct, we have a board policy around how we hold hearings, and I think a copy of that policy is available online. And at this time, I'd like to call for any disclosure of commissioners for ex parte contacts and abstentions due to conflicts of interest, if any. Commissioner Sorensen.
As far as I know, I don't have any. I don't believe Mr. Malone was part of this effort.
Commissioner Lycan.
None.
Commissioner Williams.
None.
And I will say that I have no ex parte contact on this action or any conflicts. So this is an opportunity for those to present and enter information into the record, verbal or written. Written materials related to the application can be submitted prior to or during the public hearing, are considered part of the record. Failure to raise an issue to enable a response may preclude an appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Only individuals or entities that have appeared at some stage in these proceedings may appeal a decision of the Board of County Commissioners to LUBA. An appearance may be in person or in written form. So at this time, I'd like to look towards staff for the presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. The proposal before you today is the City of Coburg's response to a remand from the Court of Appeals. In December of 2015, the board co-adopted the city's proposed urban growth boundary expansion. I'll be referring to that as UGB for short. At the time, the proposal contained findings to expand the UGB for both residential and employment lands. And concurrently, we also processed an update for their Transportation System Plan, or TSP for short. After the board approved those ordinances, Landwatch Lane County and Lee Kirsten appealed the county's ordinances to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. That body issued an opinion remanding the county's ordinances in August of 2016. The City of Coburg filed an appeal to the Court of Appeals, and in December of 2016, the Court of Appeals affirmed LUBA's decision to remand the county's decision. No additional appeals were filed. The city took action to resolve the remand. The city held multiple public hearings before their city council, adopted revised findings and a new ordinance on January 9th of 2018. And that was ordinance A-199-G. Please note that in my staff report in the exhibits, it's very minor, but I referenced ordinance 199F instead of G, so I wanted to make that note. The proposal today, though, is focused only on the employment lands portion of the previous proposal, the employment lands needs. The city will bring a separate proposal to address residential lands needs and their transportation system plan update in the future. I will let city staff explain why the project was broken out into separate sections when they give their presentation. But the goal of this proposal is to expand the urban growth boundary to include one parcel. It's 105-acre parcel on the east side of I-5, and that's proposed to have a plan designation of light industrial. The proposed
The proposal supports Lane County's strategic value of providing resilient, diverse, and sustainable economy by providing 20-plus acre industrial parcels for the region's employment needs. Staff has received one letter in support of the proposal. I handed out copies of that letter just before the meeting started, and I believe it was posted to the board's agenda website today as well. Staff recommends approval of ordinance PA 1356. With one minor amendment, there was a small typo under item 2 in the now therefore section where it references ordinance 199F, and it should be 199 or A 199G. This concludes my report, and I'm available for any questions.
Any questions for staff on the staff report? If none, then I'll open the public hearing, and I will first ask for the city's testimony as the applicant. And then we'll do persons in favor, testimony of other persons, and we'll get the additional comments by staff and any rebuttal by the applicant. So starting with the applicant.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Jeff Curtin. I'm the interim planning director for the city of Coburg. Thank you for having us here. This is a long time coming. As Lindsay pointed out, the process, I believe the last action for the Court of Appeals was in December 2016, disagreeing with the city's appeal, and in early 2017, City Council, by the recommendation of our city attorney, bifurcated the process of employment lands and residential lands because the employment lands were simply put an less controversial and easier task to tackle first, and there was a lot of resources and time spent for such a small jurisdiction. We didn't want to get nothing out of this. So as Lindsay stated, there was a couple of public hearings with City Council, some revised findings to further strengthen our employment needs and employment lands needs, excuse me, to support the acreage that is being proposed. And one minor change to further strengthen the findings was done in January 2018, and that's the ordinance you see before you. I think that's all I had.
Thank you.
Any questions for me?
Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, then I'll take the sign-up sheet here. We have Dan Terrell.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bozovich and Commissioners. I'm Dan Terrell. I'm with the law office of Bill Close. We're at 375 West 4th Street, Suite 204 in Eugene. We represent Interstate Properties, who are the property owners of the land that the city wants to bring into the UGB. I will keep my comments brief in case you have any questions. Give Jeff a lot of credit for stepping into this process. I've been not quite from the beginning, but I was here the last time with the county commissioners, so I understand some of the materials and some of the decisions a little better than he did. But I'm going to keep my comments to just a few points. When we went to LUBA and to the Court of Appeals, there were 6 issues that were raised regarding the decision for employment lands. And the remand is based on only one of those 6 issues. And what we learned from the decision is that basically the city and the county got the methodology right. So as long as we keep working within this methodology, we should be able to have an approval. The The error came in some baseline information that was used by the economist who did the regional economic analysis. He used 2006 data instead of 2012 data for employment in the city because he believed that the city would rapidly rebound from the recession that was going on at the time, which in fact has happened. Unfortunately, the administrative rule says that you have to use the most recent data. So LUBA sent it back and the Court of Appeals affirmed, said, insert the right data. So on remand, what we did was we had the economist use that data in his calculations. And given LUBA's focus on the language of the most recent data available, we asked the economist to also use any more recent data if any exists. And there had been, I think, 2015 data. And so if you look at the table, there are actually 3 lines. The first line is the old numbers. The middle line is the corrected numbers as LUBA told us. The third line is the most recent data. Now there's a Court of Appeals case that says once you start this process, you don't have to continually update the data. So we believe that the accurate line is the second line in there. I think one important point to note is that the regional economist who did the study made the same point in the first study and in the second study, and that the city of Coburg, because of its comparative advantage of being right next to I-5 and being located between 2 large population centers, having historically drawn workers from both north and south of the city, has a real comparative advantage to other areas. And it was his conclusion that it is not unreasonable. It's very reasonable to assume that the city of Coburg could capture anywhere from 10 to 20% of the demonstrated regional need. And the regional need is for large lot industrial sites of 20 acres or larger. He also made a conclusion that if the city of Springfield or the city of Eugene chose not to go after any of the regional need, a reasonable number would be upwards of 30% of that regional capture. I think you know where I'm going with this. The next point I'd like to make is that both the cities of Springfield and the city of Eugene have decided they're not going after any of this regional opportunity, which leaves the city of Coburg, Goshen, Cresswell, Cottage Grove, any other jurisdiction that wants to go after this need. In fact, they have to go after it if the county is going to capture it. And the third point that I'd like to make, it's a technicality that was in the LUBA decision. It was a factual error. This property has the record demonstrates this property has the poorest agricultural soils in the whole area around the city. And under the priority scheme for UGB expansion, this is the highest priority for coming into the city for any purpose. And so it meets the statutory requirements. The data in the record supports the city's decision, and we hope you affirm the application.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Terrell? I have one question.
Yes.
There are so many interstate properties involved. Can you list the principal ownership of interstate properties for me?
It's the Fishers and Mike Stevenson.
Okay. In that case, I just want to clarify my previous disclosure. The Fishers have been campaign contributors to my political campaigns. And I just want to make that declaration publicly. I do not believe that will sway my decision. As shown previously, Delta Sand and Gravel has been a political contributor, and I ruled against them in their application to expand their pits. So it's based on the criteria, not on who contributes to campaigns. So I just want to clarify that publicly, that Oak Ridge Sand and Gravel has, which the Fishers are involved in, has contributed to my political campaigns.
I appreciate you raising that. Any other questions? Thank you.
Commissioner Williams.
Actually, you've illuminated something for me, Mr. Chair. I too have received funds for my campaign from the Fishers. I didn't realize that until just now, that they were before us on this. So it has no bearing or emphasis on my decisions.
Thank you. So there's no one else signed up to speak on this matter. Is there anyone else that would like to testify in this matter? See none, then I'll go back to staff. Any further comments from staff?
No further comments?
And does the applicant want any further opportunity? So with that, and there's been no request to hold record open or anything like that, so I can close the public hearing. So I'm going to close the public hearing. So I look at Andy to shake his head yes.
Check that one off.
Check that one off. And now it's up to the board to deliberate and make a decision. So I look to the board. Any discussions, further questions for staff or comments? Commissioner Lycan.
So, Mr. Chair, I've asked Sarah Means if she could come down here real quick, so she's on her way down, because I want to ask her a question. Is she here? There she is. I apologize, but it was a question, or it was a comment made by Mr. Terrell that I wanted to ask a question of Sarah Means as in charge of economic development for Lane County. So Mr. Terrell made a comment that I think is very important, and that is regarding we call large lot industrial properties. Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that Lane County, that we're somewhat challenged with large lot industrial properties. Is that the case?
Second.
Yeah.
I'm going to look to council.
Oh.
Should I reopen the hearing and have this as on the record testimony?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, okay. Okay, my apologies.
So let me
Okay.
reopen the
All
public
right.
hearing. And then if Sarah, after you
Okay.
ask your question, if you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record. And
Okay.
position for
All
the
right.
record.
No problem. Am I good?
Yep.
Sarah Means, Economic Development Manager for
Sorry
Lane
about that.
County. And so, full disclosure, I was actually on the phone, so I did not hear the conversation, but I can certainly address the question that Commissioner Lycan raises related to large industrial lots. From my experience in doing company retentions, business retentions, business relocations and expansions here in the county, we certainly do have a shortage of large industrial parcels. And I would say that that's generally a problem statewide as well. We're not unique in that nature. But we certainly do have challenges, I think that's a good word to use in that regard. In fact, anecdotally, we had to pass on responding on a state lead just about a week and a half ago because we did not have adequate parcel sizes for that particular lead. They were looking for 50 to 80 acres, and we could only come up with about 32 acres in any one lot, which is actually, frankly, large for us. And there's only one or two of them out there. So countywide, yes, we certainly have a shortage of large industrial parcels, and it certainly has caused us anecdotally to have to pass up on certain leads in responding to those leads.
And given the fact that in the Coburg area, you have good accessibility to I-5 and other trends, would you classify that area being a potential to increase the large lot size to, in a sense, market our region? And do you think, my belief is, in the past, especially when Monaco was at full employment, that obviously Coburg seems to be a very significant site or community to help site companies that may need a large piece of property. I don't know, would you agree with that or not agree with that? Or what is your thoughts on that?
So generally speaking, when we have retention or expansion or relocation efforts, they have very specific criteria that those companies are looking for. Industrial businesses generally like a few things, right? Access to transportation is at the top of their list. Generally speaking, they're distributing their product, and access to that I-5 corridor is important to them. So proximity is definitely a key criteria there. But they also need other things, water, sewer, all of those sort of urban infrastructure needs are all critical in citing those different opportunities. So yes, Coburg and that industrial land, I've had a couple of conversations with staff, just getting acquainted with the area and what that might have to offer, and that would be a very interesting area, certainly in terms of industrial and commercial development.
Thank you. That's all I had. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So once again, I'll ask if there's anyone else that wants to provide testimony on this matter before I close the public hearing. Then I am going to close the public hearing again.
My apologies for the timing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so you're speaking to the application. I didn't want to have that not be on the record and outside of the process, because then we could be appealed for considering information that was not on the record. So any further discussion on the proposal in front of us? If not, I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I can move approval of Ordinance 1356, the matter of co-adopting amendments to the Coburg Comprehensive Plan, including expanding the urban growth boundary for employment land, repealing ordinance number PA 1315, and adopting savings and severability clauses.
Second.
So it's moved by Commissioner Lykin and seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve ordinance number 1356. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote, and this is an ordinance, so will you call the roll, please, Mr. Mokrzycki?
Commissioner Sorensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Lykin?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Commissioner Bozievich?
Aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Which brings us down to item 13, review of assignments. Mr. Mokrzycki.
The only one I have, Mr. Chair, is from item 8B. We'll draft a letter to the governor for signature by the chair regarding the building inspection rule change. Work with our county council will work with the AOC council, prepare an amicus brief if necessary, and a letter to the Attorney General. And then we will work with our large city partners, particularly Eugene and Springfield, to coordinate additional options for support of smaller cities. So that's one assignment that I wrapped all three or four of those areas into that. I think that's
Any other assignments we missed? I think that was everything.
Yeah.
So is there any other business for the board? If not, then we are going to be meeting in executive session. I don't believe that there'll be a necessity to come out in the public session to make a decision from this exec session, will there?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So we will probably adjourn from exec session. So the Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 1926602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session, and we are probably going to adjourn from executive session because we're not expecting the need to come out and make a decision. So With the strike of the gavel, we'll be in executive session, and we'll move up to the Board of Commissioners conference room, and we'll probably adjourn from there. So the next time we'll be getting together will be for Budget Committee on Thursday night. So we are recessed to executive session.